Good fences make good neighbors. That's an old New England adage, as true today as it was when this region was first settled. And it's advice which should be heeded if you are a woodlot owner beginning to think about managing your woodlands. In our experience, we generally find that over the course of years, boundary lines between adjoining lands have become overgrown and hard to find, and that deeds transferring property between individuals often have been poorly written or prepared. Both these conditions are unacceptable if you want to protect your property and keep it secure. And it's crucial, legally and practically, that you know where your land is, how much you have, and that you can document it. In this program, we'll talk to Barry Brusela about some periodic maintenance of the woodlot's boundary lines. Barry is a forester with a marketing and management cooperative, which is a group of woodlot owners who have banded together to get better forestry advice. We'll talk with Fred Huntress. He's a consulting forester who provides forestry help to woodlot owners. Fred's also a registered surveyor. We discussed timber trespass, the taking of wood without the owner's permission, and the importance of having a good deed and well-marked boundaries.
Now, some deeds are pretty explicit and some aren't. Now, we've got a deed here that is a pretty good example of one that isn't. The deed just says containing 200 acres, more or less, and being formerly the homestead farm of Joseph D. Welch, late of Raymond, deceased, and including the same in all the land which was conveyed to David Duran and George R. Winslow of Casco by John D. Osgood of said Raymond, by his deed dated 27th October 1879. So basically that's what you call a reference deed.
But that deed doesn't have enough detail that really helps him find a property.
There's no way, except it tells the town it's in the county.
He knows what town it's in, that's all.
That's all he knows from that deed. So with that deed in hand, you can go back, go into the Registry of Deeds, which in this case is in Portland for Cumberland County, and start with this deed and take the references. Now in the deed, they usually give a reference. It says, being the same conveyed to me by William Duran, April 9th, 1896, and gives the book and pages recorded. So you take that and go back, take this reference, and keep going back and back and back until hopefully you find a description which gives the metes and bounds of it. To be able to survey a piece of land, you've got to have two things. You've got to have distances and you've got to have directions. And until you find that, it's almost impossible to be sure that you're in the right place.
Tell me something about the process then that you would go through if I approach you and say, well, Fred, here's my deed, and I know it's in Cumberland County or whatever. What would be the steps you go through?
Well, you take his deed and go into Portland, at the Registry of Deeds, and just start working back through it. What you do is copy down all the descriptions as you come to them, the grantor and the grantee, make kind of a flow chart and follow it right back, and hopefully you try to come back to a reference to a plan. Now, these towns were all lotted out originally. There was what we call the proprietor's plan.
Well, this is just a big map of lots, is that what it is?
That's really all it is. It's just a drawing of the town as it was divided. They took the full town and divided into lots and ranges, and they were numbered by lots and ranges. So hopefully you'll eventually come back to a description that ties it down to a particular lot in a particular range. And sometimes usually you don't find good descriptions in this area until you get back before 1850, before Civil War times. That's generally where you start finding descriptions. And your best descriptions occur somewhere from 1800 to 1850, back when the land was being broken up into homestead lots. Then as people moved away from the land after Civil War times, they lost track of the old deeds, and they just gave abutters deeds. So you've got to go back until you find an original description.
Now, what's an abutter's deed? What is that?
Oh, just bordered by the land of Smith, Jones, and Brown, and so forth. They told who owned around them, but they never gave any dimensions or any compass bearings. To be able to survey a piece of land, you've got to have two things. You've got to have distances, and you've got to have directions. And until you find that, it's almost impossible to be sure that you're in the right place.
Let's say you've found that. Now, what do you do next?
Well, I use aerial photographs an awful lot. Here's an example here of an aerial photograph that I've laid out some lines on. I've tried to take the old town plan and finding points on the aerial photograph that I'm sure are the same points, like range lines. You can usually pick up a course of range lines which run the length of the town.
Now, you got yourself located initially with these roads and lakes? And then
Yes,
you go to the
pretty
lines
much.
from there, yes.
An awful lot of it is just plain experience, being familiar with the same area. You can usually find a pattern to the way the lines are running based on the fields and the property lines. But again, a photograph is just nothing but a picture taken from the air, and it's up to the surveyor to interpret it. It's the interpretation which is the key to it.
Does the photograph make it easier?
It makes it tremendously easier because I can take measurements right on the photograph and make a rough sketch of it, and then go right out in the field and try to find what the deed says. Without the photograph, it just makes it much more complicated in the field to do all the measuring.
So we have that original deed that you traced back to that has compass distance and distance and bearings, and then you put that on the photograph, and then you go to the field.
Then I make a rough tracing, usually just a tracing of this, and carry it right in my pocket, and I take my hand compass, and I go out and try to find a point to get started. Usually there's some corner that shows up quite well, or there's a corner of a wall, and then just rough it out by pacing and hand compass to see what I can find, trying to locate monuments that are referred to in the deed, like stone walls, wire fences, and so forth. And then, if there's a problem, you sometimes have to rerun the lines. A lot of the lines are just no line at all, really. Then you have to find a known point, use the bearing that's given in the deed, or correct it. See, most of these are old bearings. They go back to when the lots were surveyed, and so you have to make an allowance for the change in the compass. Without knowing the year that the bearing was taken, you have no way of telling whether that's the true bearing. You could pick up a deed today that gave a bearing of, say, north 53 degrees east. If that bearing was just recently taken, it would be the bearing to use. But if it were a 100-year-old deed, you'd have to allow for the change in the compass.
Okay.
So that's what we learned through our deed research, is going back to try to find the very first time that compass bearing was used.
So you've got your bearings or distances. Now what do you do with them?
Well, you try to find a monument to start from.
Now what's a monument?
Oh, a monument can be anything that's determined, something physical. Either a stump or the land of an abutter can be a monument. If it says goes to the land of Smith, and you can determine where Smith's land is considered a monument. But normally a monument would be an iron stake, pile of stones, granite post, a tree spotted 4 sides, something physical. Now, in our system of meets and bounds surveying, the legal weight goes on monuments. Bearings and distances are only used to find monuments. In other words, monuments hold, and you've got to try to find the original monument. If the deed says it goes on a certain bearing and a certain distance to a pile of stones, you've got to try to find that pile of stones, because that's what's going to hold if it goes to court.
Once you've been around the property and established generally where you think it is, what do you do next?
Well, if the owner wants a complete survey, we've got to go all the way around the property. We've got to measure all the lines and get the bearings on it if he wants a complete survey. And generally, that's what most of the owners want today. In the past, a lot of them just wanted one line run. They were probably going to cut timber, and they wanted one line run to use as a reference. But generally, today, most people want a complete survey. So you've got to run all the way around the property. You've got to start at a corner and go completely around the property, take in the bearings and distances, and then you can plot it and make a finished map, which looks something like we have here, which after it's plotted, it shows what we found. It designates the monuments, iron rods, stone walls, wire fences, and various monuments that are used to define the property.
With this improved survey, can you write a new deed?
Yes, so the surveyor takes this plan and starts at a point somewhere that's easily well defined and makes a complete meets and bounds. That goes back to the meets and bounds description all the way around it, describing it basically right from the map, bearings and distances all the way around it. Then that deed can be recorded, and in the deed you make reference back to the previous deed to show that it's the same property. And it's also recommended that the landowner record his map in the Registry of Deeds, because this map is no good sitting in the closet somewhere if nobody else can see it. It doesn't make it any more legal to record it, but it does put the world on notice that this is what this person is claiming is his land if it's on public record.
What part does an attorney play in this process?
Well, the attorney is going to be doing a title search probably. If the person is buying it, you've got two things to look for. You've got the quality of the title, and you've got the quantity of the land. And it's the attorney's job to determine the quality of the title. And the surveyor is determine the physical boundaries of the land. And the attorney will also take, usually the surveyor, after he has prepared his plan, and he will usually prepare the meets and bounds description. The attorney will draw up the deed.
Fred, why should a landowner go through this rather complicated process of surveying and deeds and everything?
Well, I think most landowners want to know where their land is. Just they've got a large investment in it if they've just bought it, or even if they've inherited, they've got a large investment in today's prices. So most of them definitely want to know exactly what they've got. And if they're going to do any forest management work, they have to know where the land is so that the forester or the logger doing the work can be sure that he's got it on the right property.
Bud, one of the things a landowner wants to do is to walk his boundary lines periodically and check them and check their condition. And corner post is the first thing we look for. Here's one right here.
All right.
It's kind of hard to find. Why don't you clean it out so we can see it better?
I'll cut some of this stuff down with my bush axe. Now this one's a metal post, huh?
Yeah, that's a pretty permanent corner. Some people use wooden stakes or something like that, but they don't last as long as a metal post would. Granite.
Now, let me see if we can get that down so
Sure.
we can see in here. Now, can I use concrete or granite posts too?
Yeah,
or?
those will work well. Those are pretty permanent. It's just the wooden stake will tend to rot out fairly quick and make it a lot harder the next time.
Cedar might be a good one. If we had to use wood, use a cedar stake because that lasts a long time.
Okay, I'll paint this now so we can see it real well the next time we come around.
You're using red. Can I use any color?
Yeah, any color will do. Yellow and orange don't work quite as well. They don't show up so well, especially this time of year. But any bright color paint, red or blue is.
I know
works
some places
well.
blue works pretty good because there ain't much blue in the woods, so that shows up real well.
Yep, and this red will show up well too, I think.
Okay, how often should we do something like this?
Once every couple of years, and more often if you can, just to check on the condition and see if there's been any trespass or any cutting done over the line. It's just a good way to familiarize yourself with your woodlot.
We're going to head up through this way?
Yep, I can see the next blaze down the line there. We'll head for that and we'll clean out along the way and maybe blaze a few more trees.
Well, I'm a new landowner just getting acquainted here. You work with landowner groups, do you, Barry?
Yep, and boundary lines is one of the things we help our people with, is maintaining them and maintaining them in the proper way.
You're a graduate forester?
Yeah.
And these kind of boundary lines are pretty important to woodlot management.
They are.
This tree's on the right. I think I see just a little bit of an old mark right in here.
Yeah, there's a little bit of red paint left.
So you just paint right on the bark with that one. Probably, if somebody didn't want to use a brush, they could use a paint gun, spray gun also.
Sure. Just make sure you use a good quality paint that won't wear off or wash off in the first rain.
Okay.
And I made a nice big mark there, and I made it up fairly high too, so when the snows come, you can still see the line.
All right.
That's a good.
So this mark is facing this way, so the people coming from over here.
That's right.
Very good. Now, how about on the tree on the other side?
Okay, we'll blaze this one over here also. Here, why don't you clean out around it a little bit first.
All right.
So now this tree, people coming from this direction over here will be able to see it. And the line goes right between these two trees here.
Now that grass, I'm not going to cut that grass because the frost will kill that down.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about that.
Kind of springy on this woody stuff here and hard to cut. The brush axe does a good job.
It does. And it makes it easier for walking down the line too if you keep that little brush out of the way.
Some gypsy moth eggs right there. Well, now put some red paint on there.
Yeah.
That's a good bright red.
Yeah.
There's companies that make special tree marking paint, I understand.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the kind you're using today, is it?
Yeah. And this is something that a landowner can do, is reblaze their own lines. It ought to be surveyed by a registered surveyor. but just maintaining the lines themselves and repainting them. That's something a landowner can and really should do.
So that's why you're not carrying a compass today. You're just following the line that you know, and you're going to rely on the surveyor to use the compass
That's
and do
right.
the professional
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we'll cross that little bit of water and head along here. Probably a pretty good idea to get acquainted with neighbors and so they know when you're cutting and you know when they're cutting.
Yeah, that is a good idea, especially if there is some cutting being done. It's the landowner's responsibility to make sure that the lines are blazed and that the cutter knows where the lines are. If he goes over the lines, it's the landowner's responsibility. It's not the cutter's. And that's a pretty important thing to remember.
The cutter, you mean the logger. So if there's
That's
a
right.
logger out here cutting wood for me, he goes across the line, he's not in trouble, but I'm in
You
trouble.
are.
Holy smokes. Well, we gotta,
Yeah.
let's make those big blazes
Okay.
when we get ahead here. Make them good and big and bright. So now when I talk to a logger, I really should walk this line with him and show him where the marks are so
That's
he
right.
knows what's going on.
And also, while the cutting operation itself is going on, keep walking the lines yourself and make sure that he's, staying on the right side of them. And the same thing's true if someone's cutting on your neighbor's lot. Keep in touch with your neighbor and keep walking the lines, make sure everything's okay and the line hasn't been cut over.
We've seen trees now that were on both sides of the line. These trees are right on line.
Yeah. The
If
line
you
goes
wanna,
right through them. So why don't you...
go do some painting, and I'll do some brushing around here
Okay.
with this. Actually, I'm going to kind of make a little boulevard right through here, good wide path, so it's easy to see. Now, on big trees I make a pretty good size mark, but on little trees I might even have to make a great big mark, just so you can see them from a distance.
That's right.
One of the questions I had is how often should I make the marks when I'm going through the woods?
How often, distance-wise?
Yeah, how far apart should they be?
You want to be able to see one blaze clearly from the last one. So if we can stand here, we ought to be able to see the next one clearly down the line.
So there's no exact distance, it just
No.
is, and a general rule, as long as I see one to another, that's enough.
That's right. And in real dense stands, you have to put them more often than you would in a fairly open stand like this here.
Well, this young hardwood's kind of springy and hard to work with, but I guess we'll get it out of here.
Yeah, you're doing a good job there.
Now, when these trees are looking kind of weak, can I come along and cut those for firewood?
Oh, bud, never cut a boundary tree.
Don't ever cut a boundary tree,
No.
even if it's dead.
No, because it always still have the mark on it. And there's plenty of other trees around for you to cut, and it's a legal boundary there, and surveyors recommend that you not cut the boundary trees at all. If there ever is any dispute, then these kind of trees can still be used as evidence.
62-2.
Okay, 62. Well, we'll come down. We'll check out those stumps then.
Yeah, well, there's a few across the line here. There's a few across the line, looks like.
Yeah, I guess there is. More than I thought there were.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 right here.
Well, we'll have to set up a tally here and measure them out. Okay, I've set up in the left column here the stump diameters outside the back, then my various diameters, and then the species that we expect to encounter. I can see beech, and maple, and oak here.
Okay, well, I'll be tally man today
Okay.
then. All right.
Tally and I'll measure.
All right. See if we can get our species right, huh?
Okay, there's a maple. We call that 9-inch maple.
9-inch, all right.
Okay, and I put a paint mark on it.
Maple 9.
That
so you
paint
don't-
mark, that's to show that I've measured the stump. So we're going to be going around in circles here, trying to find stumps. And I have to do that and make sure we don't measure the same one
We'll
twice.
measure the same one twice, all right?
Okay, here's a beech.
All right, a beech.
There's a beech. We call that beech 10.
Beech 10.
And here's a red maple. There's a maple. That's a maple 9.
Maple 9.
Well, I guess that's all right here.
That's what we got close by. One's up the hill there, is it?
Beech
Beech.
9.
Beech 9. Another one over here.
Beech 9.
Beech 9. Any more around here? We haven't got that one yet.
Beech, yeah.
Haven't got that.
Beech 11.
Beech 11. Well, there's a few trees cut across the line. What happens next in this process?
Well, first we've got the stumps. Now I've got to somehow determine how tall the tree was. It's about like looking at a cellar hole after the house is burned.
That's impossible, isn't it?
No, I don't think so. You look up across here and you can see some trees still standing.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't get them all. So what I'll try to estimate the heights.
Sure.
These trees, yeah, they were pretty good sized trees. We'll say they look like they're about 55 feet. So
Okay.
we ought to write down your heights there. The
Yeah,
next column
55.
over.
Yeah, 55.
55 feet.
You've mentioned diameter and height. Is there anything else to consider?
Well, the quality of the tree is important because the quality determines pretty much what product it went into. It might have been a pulpwood tree or a boltwood tree, or it might have been a sawlog tree.
All right.
So generally I can get some indication from looking at the stumps. Now most of these stumps you'll notice were good sound trees, no holes in the center, they don't
No.
show any rot.
No rot.
So we can probably assume that they were pretty good quality.
Any other considerations?
Well, sometimes you can tell a little bit about quality too by looking at the tops, the branches, and you can see if there's a lot of branches laying around close to the stump, you can see that it was probably a pretty limby tree, and that would lower the quality of it. So for this, most of these hardwoods here look like they were probably, I imagine they were boltwood.
How long ago was this cut, do you imagine?
Well, the trees, you notice they've all sprouted a little bit.
Yeah.
So that means they were cut sometime, probably they've got 1 year's sprout growth starting to show on them.
Yeah, some green growth.
So they were cut, could have been cut last winter, but I would say the sprouts hadn't grown too much. It was probably cut sometime this summer, early summer probably.
Okay, early summer.
Yes. By knowing when it was cut, that'll give us maybe some indication who might have done it too.
Sure.
If we knew who was cutting in this area at the time, maybe we can find out who would have done the cutting.
When you take all that information and pull it together, do you do that here?
We've done mostly what I've got to do out here in the field now. We've located the line and we've measured the trees and determined the quality. The rest of it's office work.
Okay. You complete the office work and determine how much volume is in these trees.
Yes, I have tables that show the relationship between the stump height and diameter breast height,
Sure.
4.5 feet above the ground. And I've used those established tables. And then I have to take the diameter breast height in either the total height or the merchantable height of the tree, and I use volume tables to determine the amount of wood that was taken.
Do you deliver your report to an attorney or to a court, or what happens?
Generally, I take it to the landowner, my client, and then I leave it up to him. If he has to use an attorney, I'll let him take it to the attorney.
Do you go to court and testify as a witness as to what you've seen here?
Yes, quite often it goes that far. A lot of times the two parties will get together and they'll settle it out of court. That's the easiest way. If a man that did the trespass admits he made a mistake, quite often he'll pay up when he's given the evidence. But if it doesn't, then sometimes it ends up in court.
How long does all that take?
Oh, sometimes it takes altogether too long. If you go to court, sometimes I've seen it take 4 or 5 years from the time I do my appraisal to the time it comes to court, which kind of complicates things.
Certainly. Now, is there anything else that the landowner might do to take this into account? He comes out here, and let's say somebody's cutting when he gets here, then what's he do?
Well, if he thinks it's on his property, he should ask the man to stop. He should tell him he thinks that he's trespassing and ask him to stop so there won't be any more damage done. And then if the boundary line isn't well defined, that's when he should get the licensed surveyor out there to establish that boundary line.
So the sequence is run the line, do the measurement, write a report, hand it to the landowner, and let him take the action.
Yes.
Okay. Fred, was this trespass deliberate?
I don't really think so. No, I think it was a case the line was poorly defined and non-existent, and I think the logger just kept on cutting. No, I think it could have been prevented probably had the logger determined where the line was ahead of time, or either landowner had made an effort. But no, I don't believe it was deliberate.
Well, we'll get our tools and head on
Yeah,
out.
I guess we've got all the stumps we're going to get here.
Fred, what can a landowner do, just in a nutshell now, to work on this boundary line trespass thing?
Well, he should check his deed and see that he's got a good description in his deed that defines his land. He should make an attempt to walk the bounds and see if he can determine where they are. And if they can't, he should hire a licensed surveyor to make a survey.
Yeah.
Blaze and paint the lines and make a map of it. And then he should walk the lines annually if possible and see that nobody's cut it, and then probably every 10 years or so repaint the lines, keep it up.
Frequent inspection sounds pretty important.
Yeah, I think so, and keep those lines painted and keep it visible.
Yeah.
Once you've done that, from then on, there shouldn't be any problems.
I'll take that gear, and you can take the compass, huh?
Okay.
Follow down this old road. That red
As a
paint
postscript to this discussion, be sure that when you start any type of harvesting operation on your land, that the boundary lines are clearly marked and known in advance by anyone who will be cutting timber. It's also a good idea to notify adjacent owners that you plan to do some harvesting near them. Get agreement as to the boundary line location before you start, and keep them advised of your progress. We'll see you next time in the Yankee Woodlot.
Yankee Woodlot was produced by the Maine Public Broadcasting Network, which is solely responsible for its content, and was made possible in part by a grant from International Paper Company.